Imagine turning 40 in a prison cell.
Yeah.
Yeah, not exactly a birthday bash, is it?
Hmm.
That's the reality for John Adrian, or JJ as he's known. And his story is about to take us deep into the world of wrongful convictions.
You know, it's a story that really makes you think about how easily a life can be turned upside down by a system that's supposed to protect us. And what's so powerful about JJ's case is that he doesn't let this just break him. He actually uses it to fuel this incredible personal growth.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're going to be unpacking JJ's story through this podcast series called Letters from Sing. It follows his decades-long fight to clear his name and this unique bond he forms with the podcast host Dan Slepian. And this deep dive goes way beyond just one man's struggle. It's going to make you think about the ripple effects of wrongful convictions on families and communities.
Totally. Letters from Sing really brings home the human cost of these systemic failures, and it's a story that you won't soon forget.
So let's start with JJ's journey. Imagine being torn away from your family and everything you know and being locked up for something you didn't do. That initial despair must be overwhelming.
You're absolutely right, and the podcast captures that feeling of hopelessness really well. But what's fascinating is how JJ refuses to let it consume him. He actually finds ways to better himself while he's in prison.
He really does. He manages to earn a college degree while he's incarcerated. Talk about resilience. And he becomes a leader in this prison program called Voices from Within.
Now, that program is really interesting. It uses the experiences of incarcerated men to try to steer young people away from crime. It says a lot about JJ that even though he's wrongfully in prison, he's trying to help others avoid that same fate.
It's inspiring,
Hmm.
but I could only imagine the emotional toll it's taken on him, missing out on his sons growing up, those milestones. The podcast is really raw in its portrayal of JJ's pain, especially when it comes to his son, John Jr., who unfortunately ends up in the system himself.
And that's where this idea of intergenerational trauma comes into play. Trauma can be passed down through generations, and we see that playing out in JJ's family. His wrongful imprisonment has this long-lasting impact influencing his son's path.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, and it adds another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Now let's shift gears and talk about the role of the podcast host, Dan Slepian. He's more than just a narrator in this story.
Definitely. He starts out covering JJ's case as a journalist, but their relationship grows into something much deeper. It becomes a genuine friendship with Dan being personally invested in JJ's fight.
And what's even more impactful is that Dan's investigation uncovers 3 other wrongful convictions along the way.
Right. It really drives home the point that JJ's case is not an isolated incident. It suggests there might be some serious cracks in the justice system. Makes you question due process and the possibility of bias.
It's a scary reminder that this can happen, and it happens more often than we'd like to think. But there's a glimmer of hope in JJ's story, a turning point. Dan uncovers a vital piece of evidence that was hidden from the defense during the original trial. It's called Police Report 93.
The discovery of that report is huge. It's like finding the missing piece of a puzzle that could completely change the picture. So Police Report 93 is an interview with the father of JJ's alleged accomplice.
And here's the kicker. The father tells the police that he could identify the man his son was with the night before the murder. And this man matched the description of the actual shooter.
The fact that this potentially exonerating information was never shown to JJ's lawyers is a big red flag. It's what's known as a Brady violation. Basically, the prosecution has to share any evidence that could help the defense, and they didn't do that in JJ's case.
So this police report that was buried somewhere in a file could be the key to proving JJ's innocent and getting him out of prison. But it raises this really tough question. Can justice truly be served after 20 years of wrongful imprisonment?
That question is a constant theme throughout the podcast. Even if JJ is exonerated, can the system ever truly make up for the years he lost, the moments he missed, and the pain he endured?
It's a really deep question that's going to stick with our listeners.
And this is where you see the real tragedy of JJ's story unfold when you look at the impact on his family, especially his son, John Jr.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, for a lot of kids with incarcerated parents, there's this sense of abandonment.
Yeah.
They deal with stigma and economic hardship. It's a lot.
Right. And sadly, John Jr. experiences all of that firsthand. He ends up following in his father's footsteps and gets caught up in the system himself, facing his own legal battles.
A heartbreaking cycle repeating itself. The podcast shares some really intimate details about John Jr.'s struggles. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's this really raw and emotional conversation between Dan and John Jr. It takes place in this rundown motel room where John Jr. is hiding out after being arrested for burglary. He's facing another prison sentence, and he's lost.
Wow. Must have been intense for both of them. Dan trying to help and John Jr. carrying the weight of his own legal trouble plus the burden of his father's wrongful conviction.
Absolutely. And in this really touching moment, Dan tells John Jr. that he recently visited JJ and that JJ expressed so much love and support for his son.
Despite everything that's happening, that father-son bond is still there.
Exactly. It shows you the strength of family and how love can endure even in the toughest situations. It's clear that JJ loves his son deeply and wishes he could be there for him in a more tangible way.
Sadly, despite Dan's efforts to guide John Jr., he ends up back in prison. It's tragic, and it shows how deeply ingrained the cycle of the justice system can be. So hard to break free.
It makes you think about those reentry programs and if they're really effective. Are there enough support systems in place for people coming out of prison? John Jr.'s experience is like a case study in recidivism and how tough it is to escape that cycle.
Definitely concerning. For JJ, it must be agonizing to watch his son go through the same system that wrongfully imprisoned him. Adds another layer of tragedy to his story.
It does. JJ's case highlights these larger issues within the criminal justice system. It forces us to ask tough questions about fairness and accountability and the long-term consequences of wrongful convictions.
Now, for a long time, it seemed like JJ had hit a wall. All his appeals were denied, options dwindling. But then Dan makes a breakthrough in his investigation.
Yeah, that's when Dan gets access to those police reports that were kept from the defense during JJ's trial. And that's where he finds Police Report 93, the game changer.
The one with the father of JJ's alleged accomplice, who says he can identify the man his son was with the night before the murder.
Exactly. And the fact that this potentially crucial piece of evidence wasn't shared with the defense is a major issue. Raises concerns about prosecutorial misconduct. Did JJ even get a fair trial?
It's shocking. What happened when JJ's lawyers finally saw that report?
Outrage. They immediately filed another motion for a hearing, arguing that the prosecution hiding this evidence violated JJ's constitutional rights.
So did that motion get them anywhere? Did JJ get another shot?
Thankfully, yes. After years of fighting, JJ was finally granted another hearing in court.
It's a small step, but a step nonetheless. Finally a chance to re-examine the evidence and challenge his conviction.
Right. The discovery of Police Report 93 gave JJ's case new life, presented a strong argument for a new hearing, a chance to maybe right a wrong that has gone on for far too long.
It's proof that persistence and investigative journalism can hold the justice system accountable.
For sure. But it's important to remember that the battle isn't over. The system is slow to change, and there might be people in power who don't want to see JJ exonerated.
Like we saw with John Jr., the system has a way of pulling people back in. It makes you wonder, even if JJ is cleared, what does true justice really look like after spending 20 years behind bars for a crime you didn't commit?
That's a question that echoes throughout the podcast.
It definitely makes you think. So what's next for JJ?
Well, the hearing with this newly found evidence, it's just the beginning of another chapter in his fight for freedom.
I'm on the edge of my seat. I can't wait to hear what happens in that hearing. Seems like a make-or-break moment in JJ's story. Okay, so last we heard, JJ is finally getting another day in court, thanks to that police report that was never given to his lawyers.
Right. And it's important to remember this new hearing isn't about retrying JJ. It's not about whether he's guilty or innocent.
So it's not like a whole new trial with witnesses and all that?
Nope. It's more focused. This hearing is all about whether hiding that Police Report 93 violated JJ's rights, his constitutional rights.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens if the judge decides that JJ's rights were violated? Does he just walk out of prison? A free man?
Well, it's not that straightforward. The judge could throw out the original guilty verdict, vacate it, they call it, but that doesn't automatically mean freedom for JJ.
Huh. So then what are the options?
Well, then it's up to the prosecution. They have to decide if they want to try JJ again, maybe use that new evidence from Police Report 93, or they could just drop the charges completely.
It's kind of mind-blowing. Even with this new evidence, there's no guarantee for JJ. It's hard to believe he might have to go through another trial after already serving 20 years for something he didn't do.
It shows you how complicated the legal system can be. Overturning a wrongful conviction, even with strong evidence, is a tough battle. These cases are rarely simple, and there are no happy ending guarantees.
It's a good reminder that justice isn't always a quick or easy process. And sadly, JJ's story isn't unique. There are so many others who have been wrongly convicted and are still fighting for their freedom.
Yeah, you're right. Their stories often go untold, their voices unheard. That's why these podcasts like Letters from Sing are so important. They bring these injustices to light and give a voice to those who have been silenced by the system.
It's a call to action for all of us. We need to pay attention, question what we're told, and demand accountability from those in power.
And for anyone listening who is moved by JJ's story and wants to learn more about his case, I highly recommend checking out Letters from Sing. It's a powerful story about resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice.
It's definitely worth a listen for anyone interested in true crime, social justice, or just incredible stories of the human spirit overcoming obstacles.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I think the question that really sticks with me is one that JJ himself asked in the podcast. He asks, what does true justice even mean when years of someone's life have been stolen? It really challenges us to think beyond just clearing someone's name. What about accountability, making things right, and healing those wounds?
Such a powerful question. It deserves our attention, our careful thought, and our commitment to making a world that's more just and fair for everyone. Because JJ's story reminds us that fighting for justice is a journey. It takes all of us working together with unwavering determination.